How do you think the church will go forward?
What's next?
Good luck trying to bet on this.
The conclave moment that everyone waits for.
They literally take the ballots and they burn them.
Those who know aren't talking, and those who are talking don't know.
Welcome to The Takeaway. I'm Alex Maragos. Today, we're diving deep on the biggest story in the world right now, the death of Pope Francis. And with me today, I have two people who are going to help us understand the Pope, the Church, and both relationship here to Chicago. I have Father Patrick McGrath at Old St. Patrick's Cathedral. Welcome. Nice to have you here. And Mary Ann Ahern, our political reporter, and also our Catholic Church reporter, who has covered the church for decades. What a big day. Thank you for spending some time with us on this very big day in the church. I want to help people understand here kind of what comes next from this point now, people who are listening and watching. So the first, let's talk about the funeral. He is changing some things from previous funerals of popes. Father, can you tell us what he wants to do differently? Maybe, I know you don't maybe have everything in front of you, but what he wants to change that may make it a little more like everybody else.
Yeah, I think he simplified it. You know, he wrote a document not too long ago, which is not unusual that the Pope would express to his staff and to those who would be managing the papal household, as they say. It's not unusual that a Pope would put down some preferences for how he wanted things. It's clear that it was a simplification of some things. It's a simplification of how he is to be buried. He didn't want, for example, it sounds gruesome perhaps, but in St. Peter's Square, when the body's on display, usually they will prop up the Pope, so he's sort of leaning, he's kind of at an angle facing the people. He doesn't want that. He wanted to simplify the actual casket that he was in so that it was just a simpler casket. He's going to be buried at St. Mary Major Basilica, not at St. Peter's. He didn't want to be buried at the Vatican. Because he has a great love of that church. He has a great devotion to Mary, and he loves the church Mary Major, St. Mary Major, one of the major basilicas there. So I think there's a lot, and Mary Ann, you may know more about, but just a lot of simplification. And, remember when he became Pope, he kept telling people in Argentina, do not spend money on a plane ticket to come and see me become Pope. That's a waste of money. Okay. Give your money to the poor, go do some service.
He might say the same about a funeral.
I think he would say the same thing about the funeral.
And so this will be your third conclave. You are going over to Rome to cover the succession of who should succeed Pope Francis. What is a conclave for people who do not know? They may have seen the movie. We'll get to that in a second. Take us through, though, the kind of the steps of what a conclave is and what it does.
Now, even before they meet, they have what are called general congregations, and they discuss the health of the church. In fact, there is one called for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. in Rome. Okay. Now, not everyone obviously will be there. It takes some time for people to gather, for the cardinals to come.
138 of them, is that what you say?
And there's actually like 250 some cardinals.
You just can't vote when you're over 80.
Yes, so 138 are 80 and under.
Okay.
And so then they will, when the conclave actually starts, all of that is true of no phones, no iPads, and none of that, no way to communicate. In fact, they claim that they have electronic jamming devices to make sure that there is not eavesdropping. As if you could sit outside the Sistine, but they meet inside the Sistine Chapel, and they gather according to how long they've been there, by seniority. That's how they're seated. I believe the first day, and this is from just reading again today about this, there is only one vote. You need a 2/3 majority. Very unlikely to get that on the first vote. And what happens is they literally take the ballots and they burn them. And the smoke that appears when you do not have a 2/3 majority is gray. They add a chemical to it to make that gray, and they also add a chemical to make it white when they finally do have that majority. But after the first day, they take up to 4 ballots a day. So most likely it would be like 2 or 3 days of voting.
And you gave us a little bit of a window just based on what you heard in the past in terms of how cardinals talk about each other and how they should be represented. I mean, of course, factions get made and then it goes forward. What a fascinating process that we only get to see once every few decades or so.
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's not immune from the normal sort of politics of human beings being together. And some of these cardinals would know each other very well. Some would not know each other at all, probably, given age and geography. And So the idea that there's certainly collegiality by their office, but they're not necessarily collegial by a lot of lived experience. You know, it's like most of the things we undertake as human beings. There's both this lovely human clumsy way, and then there's this hope that God's helping do this and lead this thing. You think about the drama of it. If you've ever been in the Sistine Chapel, or at least seen images of the Sistine Chapel, it's beautiful. They're seated underneath Michelangelo's painting of the Last Judgment. The notion is pay attention, like this final judgment of your life, and you've been entrusted with the church. Are you judging this in the way that Michelangelo depicts it here? And so movies love it, and novels love it because it's got so much secrecy around it and so much power. But I also need to trust, and we as Catholics need to trust that the Holy Spirit is somehow involved in this. And these cardinals are people of prayer. They'll listen to each other. They've thought about this question before tomorrow, or whenever the conclave starts in a couple of weeks. It's extraordinary. It really is. And there's something beautiful about the simplicity of it too. I mean, the jamming technology or whatever it might be, where there is this sense of let us focus on this moment. Let us focus on each other and the question here. And we're not going to check, X and Twitter or to see what's happening out there.
What are some of the names that you've read so far, Mary Ann, or have been hearing about as people start to look for who may lead the church next? We've read that Pope Francis has modeled the cardinals to the greatest extent that he could in his image when it came to belief, perhaps. What do you think? How do you think the church will go forward?
And as Father McGrath already said, the famous line of that person who goes in thinking he's going to be cardinal walks out not as as the Pope.
Right.
Yes. Well, Francis has chosen more candidates from developing countries than anyone. So it's not as European-centered as before. So you hear names like the Cardinal Taglia from the Philippines, who now I believe is at the Vatican, has a Vatican position. His name came up before when Bergoglio was chosen. Turkson from Africa, Cardinal Turkson, also, again, no longer in Africa, is already at the Vatican. The Secretary of State, Parolin, is someone considered. Supposedly, the Italian that he is considered a Francis favorite is Ziri. So there are names.
Yeah.
There are also names. Erdo from Hungary is considered the leading conservative. From the Netherlands, Egik, is a former physician, former doctor. So there is a very diverse, as far as, they're all men, hello. But yes, there is a
geographically,
diverse, right,
yeah.
very diverse geographically.
Yeah. Father, what would you like to see come out of this conclave? I mean, do you have thoughts on the kind of person you would like to see selected, or at least what would you be satisfied with when they do come out and pick a successor?
I think it's safe to say there's not going to be another Jesuit this time.
Okay.
And maybe ever again. I don't
for you while it lasted.
Yeah.
It was a good run. I want the next pope to be, this sounds idyllic, but to be a man of prayer, but a man of action, and a man that's willing to listen to people. And I think we had that in Francis. And I think for Francis's fundamental observation about the church becoming self-referential, I think that is spot on and dangerous, right? That sensibility that if we're just talking to ourselves and we've forgotten what it is to engage with the world, to engage the difficult question, to listen to people's real lives, especially the ones that are difficult to hear, perhaps, where people say, I've felt like a second-class citizen in the Catholic community, or I was deeply wounded or hurt by the church because I'm divorced and remarried, or because whatever the situation of their life might be. I think Francis opened doors to conversation and healing, and I'd hope that would continue. I also want the Pope to be what the Pope's supposed to be, which is also the guarantor of the faith, right? So there's a necessary sort of conservative attitude to dramatic change, but there's a way to move forward here too. And so those are all some great names. I don't know much about, these cardinals. That the cardinal who's in the Holy Land gets mentioned once when he's in Italia. He's got a phenomenal name. His name is Pizzaballa. I mean, Americans have a field day with that. But he's another name that comes up. And, we Americans bet on everything now. good luck trying to
Yeah.
bet on this because there's just too many unknowns.
And it could be, and it could be none of those. We may find
It could
out.
be very much could be none of those.
There are a few Chicago connections to the conclave, and going forward, Mary Ann, help us with what kind of Chicago touch.
Right. First of all, Cardinal Supich will
Right.
be there and will be a voting member and has had an incredible relationship with the Pope, has been someone that the Pope has relied on for the American church. And in turn, Cardinal Supich has been able to help pick bishops, a new bishop in Cincinnati, now I'm going to forget all the other, Milwaukee,
Mhm.
and he just had five new auxiliary bishops for Chicago, which is really unheard of, to get 5 new assistants through and be approved by the Vatican. So he's had a huge influence with Francis and those who are there in control right now. Will they be ones that listen? No one expects an American Pope. It could happen.
Mhm.
No one expects it, but we do think that Supich will have influence. There is Cardinal Prevost. I don't know him, but he was the Augustinian leader of the Midwest, and he now has a Vatican position, has been close with the Pope. He is a voting member, and so some are mentioning his name. And then Wilton Gregory, who grew up in Chicago and he is just retired as the Cardinal of Washington, D.C. Before that, had been in Atlanta, and before that was head of the church, the Catholic Conference in the United States, during the sex abuse, which was very difficult, but handled it, and I think most would say, in a very courageous and open way that he could have. So he's gone through a lot. And as a Black Catholic in the United States with this position, he will be listened to. So we have 3 right there, 3 Chicagoans. I think the Cardinal of Newark, Tobin, who had been in Indianapolis, is someone that people also look to. They want to know what they're thinking, where would they go? So while we might not see an American, very, very doubtful, I think the Americans do have influence on who is the next Pope.
Father, I'm going to ask for your takeaway in just 1 second, but Mary Ann, I want to ask about the conclave moment that everyone waits for. What is it like to be in the square and see the smoke and know they've got one?
Oh, well, let me tell you, I was at the ice cream parlor. Yes, I'm at the gelato counter.
As you should. Yes, so you're spending your time.
Yes, at the gelato counter with my photographer, Mabel Miller. And we hear people, saying there's going to be smoke. We hear there's sort of a rumbling ahead of time kind of thing. And we toss the gelato and just are running down to the square to find out what happened. I don't think we had one that day. But yes, there is a lot of excitement. There is. And then at first, the smoke, I have to confess, I was like, is it gray? Is it out?
Right.
And it also depends on the time of day,
Right.
and the white didn't look as, I expected like puffs of beautiful white, cloudy smoke. It wasn't quite that, it's not Disney. It's kind of a little bit of puff,
Right. That moment. Well, you're going to get that moment in just a few weeks. Wrapping up our conversation here, it's been so great to get your take, both of you, about where we are and where the church is going. Father, I want to ask you first, after everything you've heard about today, and we're going to hear more in the coming weeks and months, of course, what is your takeaway from Pope Francis's papacy and how the church received him and how he received the papacy?
I think as a Jesuit, I so admired the way he lived his vocation. And his vocation in the last 12 plus years of his life was, I'm quite sure, not something he necessarily wanted to do and certainly never dreamed about doing, that is to become Pope. But it was what was asked of him. And I think the Holy Spirit was operative in that selection by the cardinals. And I think the way he inspired people to reimagine at times their relationship to God, their relationship to the church, ideas about people they maybe hadn't thought about a lot. I think he's left an indelible mark on the church in the world. He's created a new model for the papacy insofar as just the way of being. John Paul II did that with being young and vibrant and traveling all over the world. And I think Francis did that much, much older when he started in the role, but I think he shaped a new way of being Pope. Accessibility, dialogue, conversation, synodality, wanting his priests to be pastors, to really be pastors. He'd say to us all the time, you're not CEOs of NGOs. You're supposed to be pastors, and shepherds smell like their sheep. Know your people, I think there's just a whole lot there to take. I've been deeply consoled by it. Every moment hasn't been spectacular. It's true of any of us, but deeply consoled by his vocation in action as Pope. And that's inspiring to me. It really is inspiring to me as a Jesuit, as a Catholic, as a Chicagoan. Those things matter to me.
Mary Ann, what's your takeaway from Pope Francis's papacy and everything we've dealt with in the last day or so with now looking ahead?
A very big turning of the page, a very open door that had been nearly shut to these are the rules, and if you're not following them, you're no longer a Catholic. And I think that part, whether or not everyone agrees, I do think that most people today are feeling this loss of, he made me, and as you mentioned, whether I'm gay or whether I'm divorced or whether I didn't go to church for many years and want to come back, or I was never a Catholic and now I want to be a Catholic, he made me feel that I was welcome. And I love the image of him sitting on a bus, on a public bus. I think that obviously was in
First time in
Argentina.
Buenos Aires. Yeah, I saw that picture. I think it was
And
New York
that
Times.
just kind of, to me, says, okay, here's a guy who's lived some life, who, I loved the stories of he supposedly was a bouncer at a club, or he taught chemistry. He wasn't hidden in a closet. He wasn't hidden in a church building.
Right.
That's why
He wasn't
called it-
solely an administrator.
Yes.
Yeah.
He lived some life and understood that for the church to be vibrant, we've got to go live some life too and go out and reach them. And that, I hope, we'll see if the next Pope does the same. But that will be, I believe, his lasting image.
Mary Ann, Father McGrath, thank you so much for coming in and helping us understand where the church is and where it's going. We appreciate the time.
Loved it. Thanks.
Thank you.
I love the discussion that we just had with Mary Ann and with Father McGrath. They have two great perspectives on this really special moment in history for the church and for the world. Full disclosure, I'm not Catholic, but I feel like I got a really great education just in these last few minutes or so, learning about where the church is and where it's going. So here's my takeaway on this. Pope Francis was obviously a very, very influential figure and took the church in a very different direction from where it had been going. Now, Catholics may love that. Catholics may not like that. But it's very clear to me that the church seems to be at an inflection point, with cardinals ultimately having to decide, are they going to keep going in that direction that Pope Francis was carving out and trying to carve out in the future of the church? Or maybe will it ultimately be like a pendulum? And the cardinals will ultimately decide that they'll need to move maybe in a different direction from where Pope Francis was taking them. But Pope Francis certainly generated some controversy, maybe in a good way, the way he wanted to do things a little bit differently. And we'll see if the cardinals end up electing a pope that will have the same dynamism, both on a personal level and, of course, on the level of the church, as Pope Francis had. I also know that the conclave is going to be absolutely fascinating here in the next couple of weeks. It's only something we get to see every few decades or so. And I'm so looking forward to Mary Ann's reports from Rome about that whole process and who the church will ultimately decide to lead it. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed that conversation, here are some other episodes of The Takeaway. And don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you want to listen on the go, check us out on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.